Hello, everyone, and welcome to At Barrons. I'm Andy Serwer, and welcome to our guest, Pat Gelsinger, CEO of Intel. Pat, great to see you.
Hey, great to be with you, Andy, and thanks for the opportunity to be on At Barrons today.
Of course, chip makers very much in the news. Your old rival AMD, but of course ARM, NVIDIA, Taiwan Semiconductor. Talk to us about exactly where Intel fits into this competitive landscape, Pat.
Yeah, thank you, Andy. And clearly, I came back to Intel, over a period of time. Intel had lost its way, lost its leadership, lost its engineering, or in the words of our famous founder Andy Grove, we had lost our Grovian culture, right? This maniac, data-driven, engineering-centric, view. So what have we been doing? Rebuild the company. And so 2.5 years ago, we began what I called the IDM 2.0 journey, right? Intel was the integrated design and manufacturer. Now, under IDM 2.0, we're going to design, we're going to manufacture, and we're going to be a foundry or manufacturer for other people's chips as well. So a major strategic shift. It also became a major capital cycle. Hey, we were under-investing in factory. Hey, we are going to aggressively invest in the build-out of factories for the future. So a big capital investment, also rebuilding of our technology leadership. Hey, we've done every major transistor invention for 3 decades. Do it again and get back to transistor and process leadership, but also rebuild the engineering disciplines. Products on or ahead of schedule, products that the competitors fear and customers love. So all of those things, and 2.5 years in, I say we have a passing grade. We're getting it done. We're rebuilding the company and also driving some pretty major shifts in the industry as well. And CHIPS Act and reshoring and rebalancing of supply chains. This has become a major geopolitical as well as technology and business story also.
There's a lot to pick up on there, as well as your personal story at the company, which is remarkable. You alluded to that a little bit. But just a quick question about part of the business, Programmable Solutions Group, which is a business you're looking to spin off. Talk to us about what that means and how that fits into the strategy.
Yeah, and when I came back to the company, Andy, looking at the assets of the company, hey, I said we're going to build 2 companies inside of one, manufacturing and foundry and fabless products like an AMD or NVIDIA and a TSMC. We're going to do both of those. But I also looked at the assets of the company and said, where are we not getting the most value, most execution or shareholder return? So we spun out Mobileye. Very successful, and we did that like a year ago. I announced that we had a technology equipment company, IMS as it's called, for mask writing and equipments. And so hey, we're creating another company in that area. And Intel had acquired Altera, 8-ish years ago, and we underperformed with it as part of Intel. So I said, hey, we're going to set that up to, again, be an independent company, but continue to leverage Intel and our manufacturing capabilities. So essentially, I'm creating 2 companies plus 3 satellite companies. We're really reshaping the entirety of the Intel entity as you would think about it. And, I'm quite excited about the progress that we're making, with PSG. And in this area, PSG, Programmable Solutions Group, as we call it, FPGAs. And, with that, how can I get that company back that it's a financial leader, a technology leader, and the company that customers love for long-term supply and being able to build their technology on top of that company. So quite enthused, and we've announced that we'll be separating it in early part of next year and hope to do an IPO of it in 2-3 years.
Well, those FPGAs, gate arrays, I know you'd love to talk about that, but I want to talk about your global footprint because it's a risky world out there. You have manufacturing and fabs around the globe, including some exposure in Israel. How do you think about global risk in that context, Pat?
Yeah, and this has been a huge agenda in my period as CEO. The world needs balanced and resilient supply chains. And with that, it's pretty straightforward. Hey, we can't have one port, as we saw in the COVID crisis and the world stops. We can't have one island where we're dependent. We need globally balanced and resilient supply chains, and that's a lot behind the CHIPS Act. That's a lot behind, our build outs. I only have 8 major construction projects underway today: Ireland, Israel, Poland, Germany, and the build out in the U.S. with our CHIPS Act proposals in Arizona, Oregon, New Mexico, and Ohio, and in Malaysia and Vietnam. Balanced across Asian, right, U.S., Americas, and Europe. Obviously in Israel, right, we were one of the first companies in Israel. Next year will be year 50 for Intel in Israel. And, what an extraordinary story, right, of them really emerging, as they call it, the startup nation that they have, and, leadership technology in numerous domains. And I also have a manufacturing site there as well. So for us, this is deeply personal. My next trip there, well over 100 visits to Israel over my career, many personal friends that I have there, business colleagues that have become lifelong, intimate friends of mine and my family. So yeah, this is very important to us, but they're operating with extraordinary resilience, and we continue to see our operations, continue to perform well even today.
China is another area where you have exposure, relationships, manufacturing facilities. In this new environment where there's tension between the United States and chips have become a focal point, how are you thinking about that?
It's clearly one of these, right, geopolitical overtures that has enormous implications as you think about industries broadly, but in particular, 25% or so of all semiconductors are used or consumed in China, and it delivers another 25 to 30% of the supply chains of the world. So that's half of all semiconductors are used or flow through China. It's not like we can decide in the U.S., let's stop doing China. That's half the market, right? It's an extraordinary piece inside of it. So our policies, our thoughts on this regard need to be very long-term, strategic, intentional in that respect. And we can't let that just become, are we going to like or not like a particular policy in the U.S. or China or Europe? No, we must be engaged in this. It is a vital piece of the global supply chains. That said, there is concerns, and I say, hey, we want to maximize exports every day of the week, including China, half of the semiconductor market of the world. We want to be very thoughtful about how technologies flow, and we need to be, finally aligned with our allies. And to me, those 3 parts, manage the technologies, align with our allies, but maximize our export is the right long-term policy for how we treat China and this part of the world. And as we look at it today, this is precarious. We haven't been operating this way for decades. And all of a sudden, COVID caused us all to wake up and realized, oh my, we're dependent on these supply chains. How did that happen? Well, it was 30 years of policy that led us to this point.
Seeing a lot of building of chip capacity here in the United States. You mentioned several projects that you have going on. Can that manufacturing really be competitive in terms of producing chips that are affordable for industry?
Yeah, that's a great question, Andy, and that's at the heart of the CHIPS Act. And fundamentally, if I were building that Ohio factory or any of the other ones that we've mentioned in Asia, it'd be 30 to 40% less expensive. When you're putting 150 billion of capital to work, you can't be 30 to 40% uncompetitive in that regard. And what the CHIPS and Science Act was designed to do was close that gap so that we could bring this manufacturing back to America and rebuild, what I would call is the, instead of the Rust Belt, the Silicon Heartland. Bringing back manufacturing at scale and, construction and technicians and the full gamut of the workforce. And, these manufacturing and fabrication facilities, our studies have shown they generate 10 jobs for every job that we create. Close the cost gap, build this momentum of energy, of investment, resurgence, skills creation, and job, creation. And, I also like to ask the question, what aspect of your life is not becoming more digital? Everything, right? And everything digital runs on semiconductors. This is how you wake up in the morning. This is how your thermostat runs. This is your autonomous vehicle. This is every aspect of humanity is becoming digital. It all runs on semiconductors, and that's even before we get to national security. We must have resilient leadership technology. Where oil reserves have defined geopolitics for the last 5 decades, where the technology supply chains, manufacturing, and building occurs is more important for the next 5 decades. Let's build them where we want them.
Right. And generative AI, artificial intelligence. So that is a huge end market for chips going forward, and I'm wondering how Intel plays there.
And we get to play 2 ways. One is, hey, I have my generative AI chips, and we said, build AI into everything, right? Build it into the PCs, build it into the edge computer, so that when you walk into, the manufacturing or the distribution, right, it's doing facial recognition or being able to do security monitoring, at the edge, right, in the client. Every application and every enterprise data center mining that data will become AI-ified, right? But it's also the big cloud environments for the big training. So we have components that will fit into every one of those different application areas. So build our products, AI, everywhere and in every product that we build. But secondly, we're going to be a foundry for the chips that don't get built by Intel. And to me, that's sort of, I get 2 bites of the apple here, because some of those chips, and is Google going to stop building their chip to only use mine? Maybe not. Are they going to founder with us? Maybe so. So we do have opportunities to open, our manufacturing and technology envelope to every company on the industry and say, come on in, we're open for business to be your foundry or your chip provider.
You talked about the early days of Intel and working with Andy Grove. There was also Gordon Moore and Noyce. And I want to ask you about Moore's Law, because some people have suggested that Moore's Law, which talks about chips getting more and more powerful, is kind of ending, that chips are no longer getting powerful enough going forward according to Moore's Law. Is Moore's Law dead, Pat?
Absolutely not, right? And Moore's Law, this doubling of transistors every 2 to 3 years. Today, the most advanced chips that we build are about 100 billion transistors. I have clean line of sight to hit 1 trillion transistors by the end of the decade. 100 billion to 1 trillion transistors on a chip. That's Moore's Law is alive and well. And as I, look at Intel, the company I'm responsible for and the steward of, we are the company that I say is the stewards of Moore's Law. And the language I use, until the periodic table is exhausted, Moore's Law is not dead. Our job is keep it alive and well, and we keep mining that periodic table. There's a lot of science and invention yet in front of us. It's alive and well, 1 trillion transistor chip by the end of the decade on it.
What about the supply-demand balance when it comes to chips? Some people have suggested there's a glut now after there was a shortage during COVID.
Yeah. And the semiconductor industry is a long lead time, capital intensive industry that, the only way to run factories is 101% full, right? So you have demand, you have supply signals going up and down. We had the huge COVID surge. And as a result of those characteristics, the industry has always been cyclical. Right? As I would say, I would quote Gordon Moore. He said, we have supply-demand balance exactly 2 moments in time. One moment on the way up, one moment on the way down. It's a cyclic industry. So, some amount of, supply-demand, that's the nature of the industry. But today, the industry is about $600 billion. The estimates are it's $1 trillion by the end of the decade. It takes me 4 to 5 years to build a major new factory location. If I believe we're going from 600 billion to 1 trillion at the end of the decade, I must be making those capital investments now, even if there might be some near-term, supply-demand imbalances. I am absolutely convinced this is so critical for the future. We're building for the $1 trillion industry at the end of the decade.
I want to ask you about employment, Pat, and finding workers and retaining workers as well. What does the labor picture right now look like for you, just in the United States?
Yeah, in the U.S., my biggest shortage right now is actually in skilled construction workers. For the factories that we're building, and that's the biggest shortages that we face right now. I need more plumbers and electricians and concrete workers because we're building. But keeping the best workforce, particularly in technology. If you're a great engineer, you are in demand, right? You always have been. You always will be. So fighting for labor. But as we build and rebuild manufacturing, there's going to be a lot of technicians that I need to be training for. So a piece of the CHIPS and Science Act was very much on workforce development. And this is something where a lot of resonance, even on this trip, I'm stopping in at Purdue. We've seen extraordinary interest in the Midwest schools, and that was really a big, I'll say, enthusiastic piece of our Ohio site announcement. All the Midwest schools all of a sudden said, hey, we're going to partner. Right, and this is like Ohio State and Michigan State. They've been mortal enemies for 100 years. They're partnering on workforce development, and to me, this idea has really resonated. The Rust Belt is dead. The Silicon Heartland and the talent, the skills emerging to support that. I'm really quite excited about what this means for the long term of students. And when I had the pleasure of giving the commencement speech at Ohio State, right, I says, I want all of your kids to come home, to all the parents, because the tech boom affected the coast, not the center of the nation.
Well, if you're getting those Big Ten schools to talk to each other, I mean, that's something.
Yeah.
I want to shift gears a little bit and ask about you. You are a person of faith, a religious person, and I'm wondering, excuse me, how that manifests itself at work, or if it does at all.
Yeah, and clearly I've been very public about my faith views. I've written a book, juggling God, family, and faith, about faith, work, life balance. Intel's been recognized as the most faith-friendly company by the UN for 2 consecutive years. It's part of who I am as a leader, but I also realize, my faith perspectives are not yours. But almost 80% of humanity puts their faith views as one of their top 3 priorities for their life, most important things. And if almost 80% of humanity puts it in the top 3, then I need to put it in the top 3 as well. As an employer, right, from diversity and inclusion perspective, I want your whole self, your ethnic views and your faith views to be accepted, understood. No, not just accepted. I want them to be reinforced and highlighted, because that's when I get the whole self to the workforce. And for me, I also believe I'm on a mission. I'm on a calling. God put me in this job. He's prepared me for 40 years of my career to be this person leading this company at this time, to rebuild the iconic Intel, to rebuild the technology industry, and fundamentally to rebuild manufacturing on Western shores. That is a calling that I think I uniquely wake up each day and I say, thank you, God, for giving me the skills, the training, but even more importantly, the wisdom and your guidance to go do this job every day.
When you started at Intel when you were 18 years old in 1979, went away for a decade almost, and then have come back. Final question, Pat. Why should investors buy or hold Intel stock?
So here we are. When I took the job, my wife asked me the 2 questions. How much are you going to have to work, and how long are you going to have to work? And on the how long, I said, it's not less than 5 years to turn around this company. So here we are 2.5 years in, halfway point on that journey. We're starting to see the financials look better. The products that we've worked on for the last 2.5 years, they're executing better. They've regained market share. They laid out this audacious plan to get back to technology and transistor leadership. They're sort of like halfway through it and executing for it. Clearly there's been some doubt, debate, whether we could pull off this audacious plan. 2.5 years into it, the green shoots are starting to become, proper seedlings. And I'd say now's the time to get into the the evidence is building that the greatest turnaround, but not only the greatest turnaround, but the most important turnaround in the industry, if not the entirety, right, of the business world today is now taking shape. This is an opportunity. That's what I'm passionate about, and I think we're starting to develop real evidence that, yes, in fact, we're going to pull it off. Get on in and join us.
Pat Gelsinger, CEO of Intel, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Andy.
This is at Barrons. I'm Andy Serwer. We'll catch you next time.